Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this hour. We're going to spend some time looking at some of the issues in the news. Of course, we have a looming government shutdown. Not going to make a big deal about that. We will be talking about that a little bit later this hour. We've had a dozen of these since Ronald Reagan was in office, and we know kind of the routine, but we'll go through that. If those of you that were kind of looking ahead saw that we were supposed to have Jenny Beth Martin with us, she had to cancel, so I might, if I have some time, at least read some of the material we've posted here having to do with the whole issue of sexual harassment on Capitol Hill. Her argument is, as good as it is for some of these actresses to speak out in Hollywood, be great to bring that to Washington, D.C. as well. We're going to, in the second hour, by the way, also talk about the opioid outbreak and the epidemic, if you will. New book out on pills and needles, written by Rick Van Warner, which I think helps give a personal story of him and his son Tommy to the whole issue of these overdoses and opioid addictions and other things. So that will be the second hour. And as I mentioned, we'll get into the government shutdown in just a minute. But let's see if we can talk about a few issues that are now making the front page of newspapers, front page of USA Today this morning. Apple to pay $38 billion, that's a 38 with a B, $38 billion under the tax law, and hire 20,000 workers. This is, I think, kind of another example of how this tax reform bill, in a fairly short period of time, has made such a difference. Let me now read from the Wall Street Journal, because they also wrote about this as well on their editorial page, that Apple said it would pay a one-time tax of $38 billion on its overseas cash holdings and ramp up spending in the United States as it seeks to emphasize its contributions to the American economy after taking years of criticism for outsourcing manufacturing to China. Apple also said that it would invest $30 billion, that's with a B again, $30 billion in capital spending in the United States over 5 years that would create more than 20,000 jobs. The total includes a new campus, which would initially house technical support for customers, $10 billion towards data centers around the country. It will also expand about $1 billion to $5 billion to fund last year for investing in advanced manufacturing. So anybody that says that this tax reform bill would not trickle down, would not have an impact, that these various companies would keep it to themselves. Obviously, they're investing in themselves, and of course, we have already talked a great deal about how many of these have benefited. But there was a headline, and here again is the theme that I run through Point of View so often: the need for you to read widely or read more than just the headline. There was a headline the other day on CNBC which said, quote, "Few large U.S. companies said they'll use tax savings to boost wages." Now, first of all, how you could say that in light of the examples I've given you over the last couple of weeks is a little bit strong, but it turns out that the headline might be accurate in this sense, because if you look a little deeper into the headline, you'll realize that about 70% of these large companies that they contacted either didn't respond or didn't have a comment. Now, that doesn't mean they're not. That's really kind of moving in the wrong direction. We've talked about before how AT&T last month said that it plans to invest an additional $1 billion in the United States, paying a bonus of $1,000 to more than the 200,000 U.S. employees. Walmart, of course, talked about raising its minimum wage and also awarding worker bonuses between $200 and $1,000, depending on their years of service. Comcast, the parent company of CNBC, the one we were just talking about a minute ago, said it would award a special $1,000 bonus to its more than 100,000 workers. Boeing last month announced plans to invest an additional $300 million as a result of the new tax law. Wells Fargo said that it would raise its minimum hourly wage to $15 an hour and target about $400 million in various philanthropic contributions. Bank of America, while we're talking about banks, also last month said that U.S. workers would get up to $150,000 per year, or about 145,000 workers would get one-time year-end bonuses of $1,000. PNC Financial said it would give a $1,000 bonus to its 47,000 workers. U.S. Bancorp said it would pay a one-time $1,000 bonus to nearly 60,000 employees. And I'll just give you one more. Visa said it would raise the level of matching contributions for its employees' 401k accounts to 10% from the previous level of 6%. And those are just a few that I've got on that piece of paper. At the point I'm making is when you see somebody saying, well, we're not sure this is going to make any difference. And there is a video that I even posted on my Facebook a while back in which it pulled all those quotes from all those skeptics and then put him next to all the kinds of stories I just shared with you. And when you see a headline saying few U.S. companies say they use tax savings to boost wages, that only comes from the fact that a lot of them just said no comment. We're not going to tell you. We're not going to tell you before we tell our employees, if you think about that. But nevertheless, while we're talking economics, I'm not going to spend a lot more time on this other than to say that one of the lead stories today is U.S. jobless claims plunged to the lowest since 1973. This is the lowest level of individuals going into an unemployment office and applying for jobless claims since, 1973, or in the last, I guess you'd say, 45 years. The drop in claims, according to this particular story by Bloomberg, says that companies are increasingly holding on to their employees amid a shortage of skilled labor. Businesses are struggling to find workers to fill positions, particularly in what? Manufacturing and construction, as cited in some anecdotes to the Federal Reserve's beige book, which was released on Wednesday. So, again, whether that credit goes, and I've said this before, sometimes presidents take too much credit for economic success and too little blame for economic failure. So if you want to put some of that on the previous president, Barack Obama, and the rest of it on this president, Donald Trump, you're welcome to do so. But the bottom line is the jobless claims are the lowest level since 1973. That is 45 years ago, and that's pretty significant. We won't get to all of this, but the article that we did post by Jenny Beth Martin, again, is just a concern about the fact that it was disclosed to Congress that it has a secret taxpayer-funded program to deal with accusations of sexual misconduct, and the Office of Compliance actually mandates counseling, but not for those accused of misconduct, but for those making the accusations against powerful senators and representatives and their staff. And then this office makes taxpayer-funded payments to accusers in exchange for signing confidential agreements. And, of course, the secret program is known as the Slush Fund. I have a suggestion. It's an election year. You should ask your senators. You should ask your representatives. Did they know about the Slush Fund? Are they going to end the Slush Fund? And, again, the identities of the lawmakers who actually are guilty of this sexual harassment aren't disclosed, meaning that, of course, there's no warning system for potential victims. And so one of the things that is a piece that we would have talked about today with Jenny Beth Martin was, let's take the speech by Oprah Winfrey, let's take the women that were dressed in black, and let's see if they can actually make a difference. Because after all, what has happened in Hollywood apparently is also happening in the nation's capital. You can read it in its entirety, and we'll maybe get her on in the future to talk about that in more detail. But we have a government shutdown on the horizon, so we're going to talk with Kyle Drennan about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when it was announced that all of the 2017 senior class in a Washington, D.C. high school graduated with college acceptance letters, various news outlets called it a miracle. Teachers, students, and administrators and parents were celebrating. It turns out the miracle was cheating. Both NPR and Washington Post ran stories about Frank Ballou High School boosting the graduation rate from 57% to 100% in one school year. It was too good to be true. The story collapsed 2 months ago when an investigation by WAMU and NPR found that dozens of these students had high rates of unexcused absences. Records show that 141 graduating seniors had at least 30 days of unexcused absences, and 86 had at least 60 days of unexcused absences. This is fraud at numerous levels. First, it is taxpayer fraud. Ballou High School received some $12 million for fiscal year 2017. Teachers cooked the books and perpetrated this fraud on the taxpayers and community. Second, it is a fraud to allow students who often miss class and didn't do their work to walk across a stage and receive a diploma. Some of them could scarcely read or write. Only 9% of the students passed DC's standardized test in English last year. None of them passed the standardized math test. Third, it is a fraud for colleges that accepted them based upon fraudulent academic records. Students will either have to take lots of remedial courses or else flunk out within a semester or two. And it is fraud for any student who was rejected by those colleges in order to make room for these students who did not actually graduate with a diploma. It may be tempting to think that this is a singular exception, but I wonder if there are other examples of schools that haven't been caught yet. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Heard a lot about a government shutdown, so we're going to be talking with Kyle Drennan about this. But again, a government shutdown takes place when funding runs out for particular programs or for the government itself. Most government services are frozen, but some are considered essential. And of course, that would be the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. Of course, those in the military are not furloughed. That's going to be important in a conversation we're going to have in just a minute. But then you have about sometimes up to almost 40% of government employees who are placed on unpaid furlough because they're considered non-essential government personnel. I know every time we talk about this, we have somebody calling in and saying, well, if they're non-essential, why are they working in the first place? Well, we'll get to that later if you want to. And the reason for it has to do with DACA and a number of other things we might talk about as well. We can talk about CHIP, but of course the DACA is the Dreamers Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. CHIP is a Children's Health Insurance Program, but nevertheless, the big issue is DACA, or the Dreamers, about 700,000, 800,000 individuals. And we've had, as I mentioned just a minute ago, about a dozen different government shutdowns since Ronald Reagan. Almost every president has faced one of those as well, and so it is a disruption, and sometimes it is inconvenient, and oftentimes those who want to really make a point about it will not only try to shut down, say, for example, the stores and the offices of a public park or a national park, but even try to close down the park and all sorts of things. We'll see where that plays out. But Kyle Drennan is with us. He is with the Media Research Center. He is their senior news analyst.
also a contributing editor to Newsbuster, and he has published all sorts of different articles, one which we've posted right here about MSNBC saying that Democrats draw the line on DACA and that the government, and in particular the people that run the government, that is, the Republicans, will own the shutdown. He's a graduate of Providence College and joins us now by phone. So, Kyle, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me on.
What about this? You, of course, have this piece here about MSNBC, but almost all the networks are trying to almost posture who to blame. And in the past, Republicans mostly have taken the blame, if for no other reason than that has been the story from the press. Do you think it's any different this time, and why so?
Yeah, it's most likely they're going to follow the same pattern that they've always have. Certainly back in the 90s, during the Clinton administration, there was a government shutdown, and the Republicans got the blame for that one. The last government shutdown we had was in 2013. Republicans got the blame for that. And now even though the Democrats are the ones saying we're going to shut down the government over, the DACA issue, over immigration, this is our issue that we're going to hold the line on. We're going to shut down the government. So even with all of that being said, the media is still suggesting, well, Republicans are in control, so Republicans are still to blame, even when the Democrats are the ones saying that they're the ones shutting it down. So every indication is they're going to follow that same pattern this time, if there is a shutdown.
Yeah, and again, I do see a few things that are different. I don't know that it will make a difference. But first of all, the Republicans instead have said, well, are you actually going to not pay those people in the military who are defending us overseas? And that's a little different than the other day, the Democrats saying, well, are you going to take health insurance away from children on CHIP? And so that's the first thing. And also, I do say Donald Trump does come to this issue a little different than other Republican presidents. And because of that, Paul Ryan's announcement the other day, his little kind of short interview radio piece, was all, again, sort of making this case about a shutdown doesn't accomplish anything. It's an artificial deadline. We're going to solve the issue of the Dreamers and DACA, and you really shouldn't shut the government down and take money away from those people who are in the military to defending us. Does that make a difference at all, you think?
Yeah, no, I think, the deadline for the Dreamers, for DACA, is actually in March. So they have time to continue to negotiate on that and work out a deal on that. And Republicans and Democrats have both shown a willingness to talk about that. So, yeah, for Democrats to, sort of fold their hands and say we're not going to vote for any kind of short-term funding bill and shut it down now, it's really unnecessary. And the real question is the media going to hold them to account for that? Is the media going to say, you know what, you guys are really just politically grandstanding here. You're not really, focused on trying to make any kind of a deal on any of these policies. You're just trying to shut it down for political reasons. That is certainly, the media was not shy about saying that about Republicans. Republicans were never standing on principle or anything like this. It was always just, this is just politics. They're playing to their base. Is the media going to hold Democrats accountable for, apparently being willing to do that exact thing?
Let's talk about Newsbusters, social media, even the radio program we're on, and some of those kinds of things right now, because that, I think, is a little different when we talk about one of the longest shutdowns ever, and that was under Bill Clinton because Newt Gingrich, then the House Speaker, wanted cuts to some government programs, and that one lasted 21 days. You didn't have sort of the alternative media. You didn't have the possibility that people would learn a little bit more about it. I mean, if I took this microphone out of the studio and went out and interviewed people and asked them about DACA, well, maybe they'd know something about that because Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals has been around and in the news for a while. But if I ask them, are you concerned about the shutdown of Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP, they go, I don't even know what that is. So it seems to me that if people are depending only on the headlines from the mainstream media, then maybe they can buy the argument that Democrats are actually being negotiated in good faith, and it's really these mean Republicans that are doing this. But we do have alternative sources of media now. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, I think it does help. I mean, it breaks up the dominance of the liberal media, of, the broadcast networks and, the major newspapers and all these things. It gives people, a lot of people are out there, you have a lot of citizen journalists. You have a lot of people out there with all these different websites and on social media, and they can sort of go and, report on things directly and get information directly rather than, having people have to look at the networks. So I do think that helps, get out different messages out there, so it's not just whatever the liberal media narrative is. So I do think that changes the nature of it. And also, I do think substantively, you have Democrats out there basically sort of admitting that they would be the ones shutting the government down. I mean, they're in their own words. And you actually have a lot of people on the left, in the left-wing base, sort of pressuring them like, you should shut the government down. You really need to stand firm on this. So I think those things will, all that's out there. So I do think that will put some more pressure on the liberal media to actually report this accurately. They'll still try and, go with their biased narrative, but I do think there's going to be more pressure and a lot more skepticism this time around.
And while we're talking about Newsbusters, let me encourage everybody to click on that button by your picture. And one of your latest articles was about how NBC mourns the deportation of a drug trafficking illegal immigrant. One of the things I say, Kyle, so often is for people to read widely, visit these different websites. And if you were to watch NBC today, you would think, oh, this poor family, and they're just being torn apart by deportation. You kind of get the rest of the story. And so this is why I really encourage people to go to things like Newsbusters to read exactly what's happening right now and to recognize that sometimes you're not always getting the straight story out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a big part of what we do is we sort of, tell people what the media isn't covering, or when they do cover a story, it's like, well, what are they leaving out, or what are they, sort of burying or downplaying. So that's a big part of our job.
Well, again, this is at newsbusters.org. Wanted to get Kyle on for just a few minutes. We've also posted his other article, MSNBC, Dems draw the line on DACA, GOP will own shutdown. But even as you read some of that, you see that there are some leaders in the Democratic Party going, I'm not so sure, whether that's going to be the same. In the past, Democrats have always been able, with the aid of the media, to blame the Republicans. And again, Republicans are in control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. So we'll see where that goes. But it is an interesting set of circumstances, and we'll certainly talk more about that tomorrow in our Friday weekend edition. So, Kyle, thank you for taking a few minutes out of your busy day and joining us here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me on.
We're going to take a break, and let me just mention while we're talking about the shutdown, we already have 2 Republicans that have said that they would vote against short-term government funding. Lindsey Graham mentioned that the other day. And then today, Senator Lindsey Graham, you, of course, we have some of our listeners in, of course, that area of the country that have him as their representative. We also have some from South Dakota, and Senator Mike Rounds in South Dakota now says he plans to vote against the short-term government funding bill. And his argument is that we're just trying to kick the can down the road. And actually, interesting enough, quoted from Senator Angus King, of course, is, quote, an independent, although he caucuses with Democrats. So it will be interesting to see whether they could even get the requisite number of votes to keep the government open. We'll have a lot more to say about that tomorrow. But let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. 51. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Once again, we're going to spend some time talking about the opioid outbreak and epidemic in the second hour. But while we have about a half an hour left, I wanted to do a couple things. I want to talk about the whole bill of health, clean bill of health that was given to the president by Rear Admiral Ronnie Jackson. I thought it worth just maybe a segment because of the way the media has covered that. But we also covered this issue of the shutdown. And I'd love to get your comments. So let me open up the phones now for this half hour. And, of course, we'll take calls in the second hour when we're talking about the drug issue as well and opioids. But let me just open it up right now. 800-351-1212. Perhaps some of you have some comments. Is it worth having a government shutdown over the issue of DACA, that is the Dreamers or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was something which was implemented by executive order by President Obama? And then he extended it 2 years later for DAPA for parents, which never went anywhere because of various court rulings. And so when Donald Trump took office as the president, he then rescinded the executive order, but has allowed individuals to continue to apply for an extension. And that extends into, I think the date now is March 5th. So the real deadline is not tomorrow, but the real deadline is March 5th. And so this is why you've had the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, say this is an artificial deadline, but it's a deadline created because we need to continue to fund the government. And because we don't have a budget and we have what are called continuing resolutions, then you have this short-term extension. And we've already had two senators, Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Mike Rounds, say they would not vote for this short-term extension if for no other reason because they would not want to furlough thousands of federal workers, and more importantly, they want to continue to fund the military. All well and good. Well, if Democrats join with them, it's kind of a non-issue. So that's one issue I want to put on the table. Is it worth shutting the government down starting tomorrow, actually Saturday, I guess technically, over this issue of DACA? 1-800-351-1212. The other question I want to put on the table is how much do we need to know about the president's health, or we can even in just a minute talk about the president's finances. Well, let me mention finances real quickly. I've always been amazed that so many politicians have been willing to have their IRS documents, their tax forms made public, because many of these presidential candidates, it's just been kind of embarrassing to, first of all, see how much money they make and how little they give to charitable organizations. With the exception maybe more recently of George W. Bush, most of these individuals give a mere pittance to charitable deductions and any kind of nonprofit organization or churches or anything. And it's frankly, I think it's kind of embarrassing. So, of course, there was a big flap this year when Donald Trump said, you know what, I'm not going to release my tax records. And we can have a debate about that. But the bigger issue is you might remember, those of you a little bit older, that there was a time when President Bill Clinton did not release his medical records, which is important to remember in light of what happened the other day, because you have Rear Admiral Ronnie Jackson, actually the White House physician, who was the physician for Barack Obama as well as, of course, for Donald Trump. And you saw what sort of looked like a Saturday Night Live skit. I think Saturday Night Live doesn't even need to do the skit. Just show what happened when they just for nearly an hour peppered Dr. Johnson with all sorts of questions, Jackson, with all sorts of questions, almost as if they had superior medical knowledge to this over what he had. And if you didn't see some of those, for example, one reporter said there had been some question about the president's mental illness and fitness and things like that. Can you assess the president's mental fitness at this time? Absolutely, Dr. Jackson says. I had no intention of including the cognitive assessment in this exam because, to be honest with you, I had absolutely no concerns about his cognitive ability or his neurological functions. The reason he did, says Dr. Jackson, the cognitive assessment is plain and simple, because the president asked me to do it. He picked one of the tests was a little more involved. It was more difficult than some of them, but the president did extremely well. That's mild. It was 30 out of 30. I would tell you that some of the reporters in the room might not be able to pass 30 out of 30. I'm not so sure some sitting U.S. senators could pass 30 out of 30. But anyway, okay, one reporter, you said he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke. Did you address drug addiction? Drug addiction, he says? He has no drug addiction. Reporter, can you explain to me how a guy who eats McDonald's and fried chicken and all the Diet Cokes is in this good a shape that you say he's in? And Jackson said, well, it's called genetics. Another reporter, there's an incident recently where the president appeared to slur his words while giving an address. Did you look into what cause that might have been? He said, I did. Everything was normal. I'd given the president some medication, specifically some Sudafed over the days, and I think I'd inadvertently dried up his secretions more than I intended. One reporter, is he limited to one scoop of ice cream now? I didn't limit his diet. I just make recommendations. It goes on and on and on like this. And like I said, it looked to me like it was a skit out of Saturday Night Live. Maybe it didn't to you, but I'd love to know your thoughts about how much do we need to know about a president's health. We had, as I've said before, a president who did not release his medical records at a time when some people wondered about it. There was one reporter that I think really smeared former President Ronald Reagan because there was this statement about, well, there was a time when they overlooked Ronald Reagan's Alzheimer's when he was president, and yet you can go and do a Google search to find out that there was no evidence that Ronald Reagan was suffering from Alzheimer's while he was president, and yet that was out there for people that didn't take the time to research it to actually appeal. So how much would you like to know about the president's health? There was a time when we covered up much too much. Woodrow Wilson was so incapacitated that in some respects his wife ran the government. There were medical concerns with not only John Kennedy, and certainly you can go all the way back to Abraham Lincoln and others. So how much should we know about the president's health? How much of this was simply to try to once again actually prove that this person is not fit for office? And if you have some comments about that, I'd love to get your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. First, you can talk about the government shutdown. Second, about the president's heart. I'll get to that in just a minute because the New York Times was not pleased to hear what Dr. Ronnie Jackson had to say, so they went and talked to other cardiologists, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Let's go to South Carolina first. Good News Network. Albert, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
First of all, I'd like to say that Mr. Trump is extremely cognitive. He is a brilliant man. He's the best president we've had in years, and it is indeed a shame that the liberal media doesn't have anything to do other than beat on him when they're the problem. And that's all I need to say.
Okay. Thought you were going to say something about the shutdown, too, but any thoughts about that?
No, we don't need to shut the government down.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll take some more phone calls in just a minute. Let me, before I do that, mention something I just talked about. The New York Times said, we are not convinced that even though this is an individual who has been the White House physician, and nobody's questioned his credibility when he was doing various physicals for Barack Obama. I think he also did for George W. Bush. But no, we need to just go get some second opinions. So the New York Times talked to a number of cardiologists, and this was their assessment. Cardiologists not associated with the White House said Wednesday that President Trump's physical exam revealed serious heart concerns, including high levels of so-called bad cholesterol, which raises the risk that Mr. Trump could have a heart attack while in office. Now, you and I don't know that. Those doctors don't know that. But I love what Jim Garrity put out the other day. Sooner or later, his heart will know that. You know, if the doctors are right and the physician, Ronnie Jackson, is wrong and Donald Trump is wrong, you know what? We'll figure that out because, you know, you can't spin arterial blockages. And so, again, it might be good for Donald Trump, 70 years of age, to change his behavior. And maybe he will stop that. Maybe Melania will suggest that. Maybe he will start walking more than just walking on a golf course. There was a time when my weight was close to his. My height is close to his. My weight was, but I'm 25, almost 30 pounds lighter simply because of paying attention to what I eat, drinking some of this weight loss coffee and a number of other things that have, brought me back down and made it much easier to hit all those target levels. It would be good for him in one of the most stressful jobs in the world to maybe reevaluate this, because the two presidents that preceded him certainly did exercise. George W. Bush was notorious for that. Barack Obama, even before that, let's give at least partial credit to certainly people like Bill Clinton. And so something to think about. But nevertheless, it is one of those stories that has had a little bit of life of its own, that the president is not mentally fit, and yet he passed 30 on to 30 in terms of the cognitive study, and he is a heart attack ready to happen. And that's not exactly the conclusion of the White House physician, Dr. Ronnie Jackson, Rear Admiral. So we'll take a break, and we'll take some more of your phone calls. But if you would like to join us and join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Oscar Rodriguez is a decorated Air Force veteran who retired in 2013 after 33 years of service. Oscar was invited by Air Force Master Sergeant Chuck Roberson to give a flag-folding speech at Roberson's military retirement ceremony, something he's done over 100 times. Oscar agreed to give his stirring and patriotic speech, but the Air Force unit commander at Chuck's base presented a problem. Oscar's flag-folding speech included the word God. First, the unit commander tried to prevent Oscar from even attending the ceremony. When he was informed that he could not legally prevent his attendance, he told Chuck that Oscar could not give the speech. But like any good airman, Oscar was not going to abandon his wingman. He decided to give the speech anyway. And as a private citizen, Oscar is no longer subject to the commander's authority. But when Oscar stood to deliver the speech during the retirement ceremony, 4 senior airmen approached him, assaulted him, and physically dragged him out of the retirement ceremony before he even had a chance to say the word God. The Air Force broke the law and abused its power, discriminating against Oscar and service members everywhere who want to mention God in their private retirement ceremony. First Liberty Institute represents Oscar because no one should be assaulted for mentioning the name God. To learn how First Liberty Institute is defending religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and in the second hour today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about drug abuse and the opioid epidemic, and it's a part of a new book out on pills and needles. Rick Van Warner has been through it with his son, Tommy, and so we're going to talk about that. It'll give you a face for the issue, but also certainly some of the facts, and one of the reasons why this is one of the biggest health issues we're facing in the 21st century. And we're talking about the president's heart. If we had Nick Pitts with us right now, maybe we'd talk about the president's achy, breaky heart, but we're talking not about his metaphorical heart, but his physical heart. He's a cardiologist, and what about that? And if you have some comments, we would welcome them. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Georgia, WLPE. Richard, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, Kerby. Thank you for taking my call. I was listening to... Last night I was watching a little bit of Hannity. Normally I don't, because I just don't like to do that stuff. I watched their depiction of all these questions that were put to the Surgeon General or the doctor that, and it's kind of scary to me that people who are supposedly educated can be so involved with hatred and just demonizing the sitting president that they can ask such ludicrous questions to try to find some sliver of fault to blow up and demonize our president more and more. It's just amazing that people can be so easily duped into this stuff. And people are following this. They're listening to these questions. Yeah, that's a good question. And just like you said, it looked like a Saturday Night Live segment there.
I think they just play it. I mean, or they're going to have something almost exactly like it this Saturday, because this was parody of itself. And I read just a few of those quotes. Were those at least kind of what you're thinking about here? Just questions about what he ate, where he did. Are you sure? What kind of cognitive study did you do? And just all the other things. They wanted this to be a silver bullet. We found that this man has very significant diabetes. He has heart disease. He is mentally unstable. He forgets questions. He is not able to function in his job. We would recommend that we implement the 25th Amendment, and we put him aside. And that was not exactly what the press conference was the other day. And I can never remember a time when the White House physician came to answer questions. So I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump put him out there just saying, okay, have at him. And this poor Rear Admiral, again, Dr. Ronnie Jackson, I don't think he's ever been through something like this, but that just shows the bizarre world that we find ourselves in right now with the President of the United States and the press corps.
Yes, it is, and it's so sad because it shows that how a great segment of our population can be duped into believing and following this stuff. It's kind of scary.
Well, this is why we do Point of View, and that's why we encourage you to read widely, and don't believe me, check it out. That's why we've posted a couple of articles on here today. It's why we give you links to other websites. I recognize a lot of your friends, neighbors, coworkers, even family members don't. They just are kind of sheeple. They're just like sheep. They just kind of follow where everything goes. But I'm hoping that you'll be more educated, and because of that, you'll be a lot better off. So, Richard, I appreciate the phone call. Let's get at least one or two more phone calls in here. How about Ina in Virginia? Ina, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Basically the same thing that the gentleman was saying. But you know what, Kerby, it didn't surprise me, because when I first heard that he was going to make his physical public, I knew right away. I mean, any sensible person, knowing the way that the press have been carrying on, I knew right away that they wouldn't accept. And the doctor was so professional. I watched the original, and I was cracking. I thought it was funny, because after a while, the way that these people act, the press act, you have to really laugh about it, because they were acting more crazy than they're a president of.
This is what Gary Bauer said the other day, and I just thought it was great. He said, the report was delivered by Rear Admiral Ronnie Jackson. He said, unfortunately, I have to tell you that there was evidence of mental instability and cognitive failure, not by the president, but by the members of the White House press corps. He was, of course, we're being funny. I mean, I know some of the press, and they're good people, but some of them really, if there was anybody that seemed a little mentally unstable, it was a few of those reporters in the room asking the questions. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I watched the whole thing, and my mouth was like, I cannot believe these are rational human beings. But he was so professional and took such good time and explained everything, and then they came back and asked the same thing. And I'm going like, what didn't you understand about what he said? And then the one that really got me was when they asked about his denture.
Dentures, yes. Where did that come from? I was waiting for them to ask if that's his real hair. I was waiting for that one too.
I'm convinced. As Christians, we know what the Bible say about hate, right?
Yeah.
Hate is such awful thing, and that's exactly what's happening right now. They hate our president so much. They hate this president so much that they can't even think rational anymore. And actually, what I think, what they're accusing him of is he's driving them crazy. I'm sorry, but it's funny to me because, to me, he's making them crazy.
Yeah. Well, again, you either got to laugh about it or cry because, I mean, I have been around a little bit longer than a lot of my listeners here. And so, again, for my millennials out there especially, and we just had our Millennial Roundtable yesterday, this hasn't always been the way this has been run. There has been a fair amount of cover-up of some of the health issues of some of the presidents in the past, and there was very little published. Oftentimes you'd have a one-line statement. Today, the White House physician actually did a evaluation of President George W. Bush or President Barack Obama, found that he was in excellent health and told him to continue exercising and doing what he was doing, or something like that. It doesn't necessarily even take 20 words to actually report it in the past. But in this new environment, this actually took almost an hour in a press conference. And I mentioned something else that we're starting to see. When we do get a chance to see these interviews, and when we get to see some of the back and forth with members of Congress, we realize these people don't listen very well. We just answered that question about 5 minutes ago, and you're asking the same question again. So there's just an unbelievable amount that's taking place. And I'm actually running out of time before I'm running out of calls. So if we have an opportunity in the second hour, we'll give you that chance to join us. But I suspect we'll spend so much time talking about opioids and drug abuse and those kinds of things, we might not get to those. So if you want to, if you're one of those ones on the line that you wanted to ask a question or make a comment, if you don't get in today, and it's possible, given what we're going to be dealing with in the second hour, I will give you first chance on Friday. Now, Friday, we're also going to get an update on the Walk for Life, the March for Life, and some things like that. But we'll have more than enough time to talk about how this president has been treated and how even his White House physician was treated the other day. So if I don't get to you today, which is quite possible given some of the things we're going to talk about in the second hour, we'll certainly give you first opportunity in Friday's weekend edition. Let me just mention we do have a number of articles you want to find. Fighting sexual abuse on Capitol Hill. I talked about that in the first hour. Trying to prevent a government shutdown. We talked about that as well. And I just mentioned there's a very good piece on why does the media keep calling Donald Trump a racist. Now, some of that comes back to the shutdown and DACA and those kinds of things, but very good piece that was written by Ben Shapiro, which helped me understand a little bit more why that is also in the news so often. So we'll take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about on pills and needles, the opioid epidemic. We'll be right back.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think you guys, y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about the opioid epidemic in the United States. It's something we spent some time talking about back in August, because that is when President Donald Trump declared the opioid epidemic to be a national emergency. So it gained a great deal of attention. But you might remember that People magazine featured a really kind of an incredible portfolio there, and on its cover and inside showed the faces of those who were actually those who were affected by this epidemic. And so when we talk about these deaths, more than 90 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. When we talk about some of these fatal overdoses tripling, I have one graph here from USA Today, which actually is from October, which they show how many were actually overdose deaths from opioids back just in 5-6 years ago. And going from 2,000 to 20,000, you just see this incredible rise due to fentanyl and a number of other things. And, of course, then we've also talked about this because Senator Ron Johnson in Wisconsin has been looking at this issue and wonders out loud, as I think most of us do, whether the Medicaid expansion is part of this. We're going to talk about Big Pharma. And we're also going to not just give you facts and figures, but tell the story of Tommy, the son of Rick Van Warner, who is a 30-year veteran of journalism, crisis management, and media relations. He's a graduate of Syracuse University School of Communications. Individual's been writing for some time and has put together this book, published by our good friends at Baker Bookhouse. It is entitled On Pills and Needles, The Relentless Fight to Save My Son from Opioid Addiction. We have information about that. I would think you would be able to find this in your local bookstore, but if not, we have links that you can find it for. It is 260 some odd pages. And Rick, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me.
Talk about Tommy and really what kind of boy he was, because early on in the book you talk about the fact that we all have children. We wonder if they're going to maybe go the wrong path. He certainly didn't strike me, from what little you tell us about him, that he would be one that you would be writing an entire book about in terms of drug addiction.
No, not at all. Tommy was very sweet, gentle, more of a type B, if you will, versus our other children, which were a little more type A. And he was artistic and kind of a dreamer, you know, loved the beach, did normal things. There really wasn't any signs that there would have been any trouble that would enter his life. And it wasn't until he didn't show up from school one day after high school at age 16 that we even sensed that there was a problem. Little did we know he had fallen into use of OxyContin as an escape, along with some other kids in the high school, where these pills were flowing very freely at the time at the epicenter of the Florida pill mill epidemic.
One of the things I thought was so interesting as you work your way through the book is, again, he doesn't strike me as a manipulative kid, but he figured out, or somehow was able to keep convincing you that I'm straight, everything's fine. And, of course, any parent that has been through this knows that sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, and there's just always this problem of, do I even trust my son? But he doesn't strike me, again, from what little you talk about here, as one that would be deceptive and manipulative, But that's what he developed pretty quickly as a persona in order to keep this going.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is, and I think what makes this particular drug and opioids, which a lot of people, they carry a huge stigma because heroin is an opioid, and the street heroin, it is responsible for many of the 90-plus deaths every day of Americans. But the other side of the opioid coin is the pharmaceutical opioids, which are OxyContin and Percocet and things that are prescribed for pain and really something created and for many years deceptively marketed by the pharmaceutical industry as non-addictive. But when they're crushed, they're immediately addictive. And I think one of the most difficult things for parents is, unlike marijuana or alcohol or things that most parents know to keep an eye out with their teenagers that may be experimenting during that period of life, there's no odor, there's no bloodshot eyes, there's none of the obvious telltale signs that you might be able to tell if your kid was smoking marijuana or drinking. And with opioids, it's very, very much something that at first they don't look any different, and they seem to be functioning very normally. It isn't until they fall into the addiction that hallmark of the addiction, as in any addiction, is deception and lying and manipulative behavior.
Well, and again, let's talk about parents for just a minute, because you strike me as an outstanding father, and yet it is a statistic that you have in your book, which we've talked about before. Point of View has been broadcasting for 45 years, and I can remember one statistic years and years ago we dug up about the fact that when you go and interview the parents of teenagers and ask, has your child ever used any illegal drug? And that's back when marijuana was illegal. Now it's kind of legal in some states, but going back decades, most all of them said no. Then they'd ask the kids, and in round numbers, 1 out of every 4 had been using some kinds of drugs, in some cases really hard drugs like cocaine and heroin. So even the best parents, even the most observant parents, sometimes tend to think the best of their kids. And frankly, the kids are pretty good at pulling the wool over our eyes, aren't they?
Absolutely, they are, and I don't think that's anything new, really. And recent research on the opioid epidemic has shown, as you said, that most parents surveyed would say, "Oh, absolutely not. My child's never touched those drugs." But then they survey the kids, and you find out that they have. So there's a real disconnect, and I think some of it comes in. Yeah, some of it's cultural, some of it is communication in the household between the family. I mean, in a family like ours, we have 4 kids total, and we were always all running in a lot of different directions between sports and activities and school and everything else. That to recognize that there was a problem with Tommy really didn't show up until he had just chosen to disappear, and it took us several days to find him.
We were privileged to have with us.
We did find him in time.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that in just a minute, because it's an incredible story, but we're also going to broaden that and talk about, why is this such a big problem? How did Big Pharma benefit? How did some of these various doctors that really weren't even doctors or had diploma mill kinds of diplomas and things like that, how did this all develop? So we're going to look at it at 2 levels, one in terms of the broad issue, and then, of course, follow the story of Tommy. And let me just mention that if you are interested in this issue, if you're dealing with this issue, but most importantly, I think all of us know someone who is, friends, neighbor, coworker, family member, somebody, we have information about the book. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we've also made it easy for you to order the paperback or the Kindle. And there's just a lot of facts and figures and stories. And, of course, as you might imagine, Rick Van Warner is a very good writer. He's been involved in journalism for more than 30 years and tells a powerful story. So we'll come back and hear that story, but also get into how much money is made on this and who's to blame. There's a lot to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when it was announced that all of the 2017 senior class in a Washington, D.C. high school graduated with college acceptance letters, various news outlets called it a miracle. Teachers, students, and administrators and parents were celebrating. It turns out the miracle was cheating. Both NPR and Washington Post ran stories about Frank Ballou High School boosting the graduation rate from 57% to 100% in one school year. It was too good to be true. The story collapsed 2 months ago when an investigation by WAMU and NPR found that dozens of these students had high rates of unexcused absences. Records show that 141 graduating seniors had at least 30 days of unexcused absences, and 86 had at least 60 days of unexcused absences. This is fraud at numerous levels. First, it is taxpayer fraud. Ballou High School received some $12 million for fiscal year 2017. Teachers cooked the books and perpetrated this fraud on the taxpayers and community. Second, it is a fraud to allow students who often miss class and didn't do their work to walk across a stage and receive a diploma. Some of them could scarcely read or write. Only 9% of the students passed DC's standardized test in English last year. None of them passed the standardized math test. Third, it is a fraud for colleges that accepted them based upon fraudulent academic records. Students will either have to take lots of remedial courses or else flunk out within a semester or two. And it is fraud for any student who was rejected by those colleges in order to make room for these students who did not actually graduate with a diploma. It may be tempting to think that this is a singular exception, but I wonder if there are other examples of schools that haven't been caught yet. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Rick Van Warner, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the opioid epidemic in the United States. And again, we'll take your phone calls in just a minute, and perhaps you have stories that you would like to recount as well. Rick, let me, if I can, talk about why this became so quickly a public health crisis. And there are two reasons.
Certainly.
Let's talk about the political part, and that is Big Pharma and their lobbyists threw lots of money at this. And there was kind of lax, that's a nice word, maybe too nice a word to say for this. And so there was not a lot of regulation. And so very quickly it grew like wildfire. And because you're in Florida, you've said that you were sort of ground zero for things like synthetic heroin, like OxyContin. So talk about that, if you might.
Sure. It really began in the late 90s when Purdue Pharma out of Connecticut, which were masterful marketers of pharmaceuticals, they won a patent for a substance, OxyContin, which one of the primary ingredients is oxycodone, which was a substance that had been banned in the United States for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And they won the patent on the basis of this new supposed revolutionary time release mechanism that it only released the dose of medicine over a period of hours. In reality, the people who abused this medication and the kids that found it as an escape mechanism found that they could crush it and eliminate the time release immediately and get the full dose by snorting or smoking or injecting. In Florida, because we had very little oversight on prescriptions, so somebody could take one prescription from one of these strip center pill mills and start popping up all over Florida and other places, and fill it many times at different places to get more and more drugs with no monitoring or regulation. So the pharma companies and then later others followed suit because of the billions every year that Purdue was making off what they marketed as a non-addictive, the new wonder drug, and it was being prescribed for everything from back pain to tennis elbow. And across the board, it just, there's never been a spike of pills in the market that became as widely, prescribed as OxyContin and similar substances for pain. Not that there aren't certain legitimate uses for people in extreme pain after surgery or cancer patients, et cetera, but this became just a market under all types of deceptive marketing. Get in the swing with OxyContin was one of the slogans, and they'd send out CDs with swing music to senior homes and so forth. For instance, one of many things, and they took doctors on junkets, and they really just spent millions of dollars to market this supposedly non-addictive drug. By the time the Supreme Court and the justice system penalized them and they admitted to this deceptive marketing, it was 10 years later in the late 08 or somewhere in there. And by then, the $600 million fine they paid is a pittance compared to all the billions they continue to rake in to this day.
Wow. And again, you kind of got both points in that answer, because number one, there was the lack of regulation. And number two, it was the fact that the kids figured out very early that if you could crush the pills, then the time release mechanism was removed. It neutralized that. So like you said, they could snort it or smoke it or all sorts of things. And let's get back to your son, Tommy. He entered high school in 2007, and you point out that by 2010, Florida pharmacies were churning out 650 million. That's 650 million opioid pills per year, with 93 of the top 100 oxycodone dispensing doctors actually working right there in Florida. So it was unfortunate for your son. It was almost a perfect storm. He's coming to school Absolutely. At a time when you are at ground zero. And in some respects now, parents all over the country are experiencing what you experienced back then. But follow the story with Tommy. Yeah, good.
Yeah, initially it went up what they started calling the hillbilly heroin, as it became to be known, up the highway. So there were people that were trafficking. It was so readily accessible in Florida that it went up into Appalachia and the Midwest, and it's since spread to all 50 states, of course. But it's it was a terrible thing in our family. It was tough to reckon with. First of all, none of us could fathom the idea that we would have a drug addict son, or an opiate addict son, which we knew very little about opioids at the time. So it was definitely a long and difficult battle. And when I started doing some of the research into why this epidemic was allowed to flourish, it really became very clear, and I stood on the backs of a lot of other journalists that showed very clearly how many millions of dollars the pharma industry had been pumping into regulators and politicians to get them elected, so that people essentially, our country took a blind eye to this for nearly a decade, the first decade of this millennia. And it wasn't until even recently, the last 3 or 4 years, that people are starting to get serious about the level of epidemic this is.
Well, let's talk about the father-son interaction. I've been down this road, so I can have some appreciation for that, the name-calling, the denial, all the rest. But you have a section where you talked about, the 12-step people always talk about the 3 C's. I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. But, that first C just hits you as a father, doesn't it? I know I didn't cause it. I know it's not my problem, but I know I feel guilty for it. Talk about that.
Well, I certainly felt guilty for it because I find the label of addiction as a disease a little bit simplistic and almost trite it's a convenient way to describe something that's much more complex than that. I really do believe it's the genetic predisposition is a piece of the puzzle because it's really a brain chemistry illness, if you will.
Yes.
And it's one of socialization and other things, but really most people, opioid are an escape drug. It's somebody who's trying to escape their pain, and in most cases, it's not physical pain; it's emotional pain and psychological pain that they're running from. So, for me personally, as a father, initially I blamed myself, feeling it's genetic because I had a father who was an alcoholic, my late father. I had a brother who has been 30 years clean and sober from drug addiction. So it stands to reason that I have 4 children that somebody's going to get the genes. But I learned pretty quickly that I had to take myself off the hook a little bit because there's a lot more than that at play. And as I learned and interacted with many, many other families going through the same thing, it really can happen to anyone. It's an equal opportunity destroyer.
It certainly is. Let's take a break, and when we come back, let me give you a chance to join the conversation today. Perhaps you have some questions about drug abuse and a variety of other issues. And by the way, if we look at all drug abuse, and again, I think the best estimates are that about 6 out of 10 overdose deaths are due to an opioid. But if we look at all of those, I have a commentary coming out next week looking at the fact that life expectancy for Americans dropped in 2015. It dropped in 2016 again, and I predict it's going to drop in 2017. And there are a couple of reasons for that, but one of the more significant ones is suicide and drug overdoses. And this is where it really hit me in this article that came out. The overdose numbers are staggering. Get this in your head. More Americans died of overdoses last year than were killed during the entire course of the Vietnam War. And, of course, many of those were due to opioid overdoses, not all. But if you think about the number of people we lost in Vietnam, if you've ever been to the wall in Washington, D.C. and seen all those names, recognize that is equal to the number we're losing. And, of course, back in August, when People magazine had that spread on its cover and on the inside of the faces of the epidemic, you recognize that it strikes so many ages, so many backgrounds. The overdose deaths probably the highest for adults, but certainly we see it for young children as well and from all different backgrounds. So let's take a break. And if you'd like to join our conversation, maybe share your own testimony, we'd love to hear it. 1-800-351-1212. Rick Van Warner with us as we talk about this new book on pills and needles, The Relentless Fight to Save My Son from Opioid Addiction. And again, it is published by Baker Books. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we have information about that on our website, pointofview.net, so that you can order it both in paperback and in Kindle. And even if you are not interested in this, can you take the time maybe to forward some of this information to people that you know that would be? We're going to take a break, and we'll take some of those phone calls, too. 1-800-351-1212. Rick Van Warner with us. We'll continue with him and you right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151. Or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today as we talk with Rick Van Warner about his book on pills and needles, The Relentless Fight to Save My Son from Opioid Addiction. If you'd like to join us, we'll take a phone call here in just a minute, 1-800-351-1212. But, Rick, for just a minute, I wanted you to maybe talk about the impact it had on your family, because at one point you talk about that Tommy's battle wreaked havoc on your marriage, your family, and your health. And after kind of going through a whole series of psychologists and psychiatrists and everything, those of us that, tend to be in the news business tend to be a little skeptical. You turn pretty cynical until you kind of spent some time with a man by the name of David, your therapist. But talk about this for just a minute, because this is a problem that is a family issue. Even when it's only, quote, their problem, pretty quickly it becomes the family's problem, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, there's when someone is in the throes of addiction, there's only one thing on their mind, and that is how their brain gets rewired with opioids, is that the only thing on their mind is to use again, to not go into that pain of withdrawal. So there's no logic or rational discussion that really can make much of an impact to get through that. Meanwhile, they're stealing, they're lying, stealing from their siblings. Pretty much every ounce of energy and air in the room and in the family is being taken by this person in addiction. And so it was very difficult. It was very difficult on our marriage. At times we would flip back and forth between good cop, bad cop, if you will. We would, the children, his siblings at times said, "What are you doing? Why are you not just turning them out?" And there were times when he did go through a couple periods of homelessness. But at the end of the day, it was our family refusing to give up on him and coming around to just envelop him in unconditional acceptance and love, despite all the pain and the problems that came with it, that helped him overcome where numerous therapeutic programs, residential and outpatient programs, seem to have no impact.
Wow. Let's take some phone calls along the way. We'll drop those in and not take too many, but did want to give a few of you to hear the story or to share your own testimony. So let's go to Arizona, KNLB. Kent, thank you for joining us today. I understand that you got addicted to oxycodone. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I had 3 major vascular surgeries, and no one told me, and this is the truth, no one told me. I can't find any papers that I signed, and I was going to be given this drug. It's 2 years down the road now, and I thank God that I'm living alone. I wouldn't want this on my family, but if I don't have the pill, I not only suffer mentally, I want to sleep all the time. That's number one. I'm not a rational person when I'm on it. Carrying on a conversation, I forget where I was with the conversation. But I want to sleep all the time. I want to. I don't know how to say it. It's I kind of drift, and I get mad because I wake up sleeping in my chair. I didn't intend to sit down in my chair and go to sleep, but when you try to come off or prolong your dosage, before you take another pill, the things that you go through are terrible. Mentally, there's a nervousness that takes you over. Right now, I'm waiting on this half a pill. I'm down to halves now, trying to do that. But I'm going through shakes right now. I'm very nervous, and I'm fearful of what the next one's going to do. And they told me, this one nurse told me, said, "We'll just put you in a padded room for 3 days. That's the only way you're going to get off."
Let me give Rick a chance to kind of react. You've probably heard some of this. You've done some interviews and certainly done the investigation. But as far as I can tell, Kent never knew he was going to be addicted, and now he's living with that addiction.
I think I think that he's like so many people that people, there's this misnomer out there that people choose to be addicts. They don't choose to be addicts. They, in the case of our son, it could be argued, well, he chose to start down this road originally as an escape. But once that addiction of this powerful narcotic has you in its hold, it rewires the brain chemistry to make it nearly impossible to overcome. And as Kent said, it's like having the flu times 100 is how my son's described it to me. And I've seen him in those states, and to the point where some people just would rather die than just give up and do die. And that's where a lot of times they just say they just will overdose on purpose because they just can't take the pain anymore. And the only relief from the physical and psychological addiction of it is to take more pills.
Yes. Well, incredible. You've already sort of addressed this issue of the brain rewiring, but that is important because we've all heard people say you just need to have some willpower. Now, I recently heard one individual that said, you don't understand how much willpower you're talking about. I was a Navy SEAL. Now, just think of what it takes to even become a Navy SEAL in terms of going through Hell Week. And then just think what it takes to be a disciplined Navy SEAL for years. And then he got addicted, and he said, and if I, who have demonstrated willpower that most of you will never even understand, if I become addicted, what chance do you have? And I thought that was a powerful way to show how strong this is on your brain. Is that fair?
Yeah, very fair. And it's very interesting. I just last week, I was speaking on this topic out in Idaho, and I was with a man that's a veteran who is working now with veterans. And, there are also, there's a lot of research going on brain chemistry as it relates to drug addiction, but also from PTS and the effects of how these go hand in hand. And there's a tremendous number of our veterans who are coming home from Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere that are suffering from PST and or PTS, and then also turning to opioids as a way to just escape their nightmares, escape their feelings. And so there's a huge problem in our veteran community, and so the government is doing some significant research studies, I was told, and I was very encouraged to hear, because there is no silver bullet on this problem.
I understand that.
And it was nice to hear that there's a recognition in the scientific community that this is a lot more of a disease of brain chemistry than a disease of choice or willpower.
One of the things you talked about is how important your family was to Tommy. So let me go to Ann, because I think she has a story that reinforces that. So Ann, KNEO in Missouri, thank you for joining us. Tell us about your son.
Yeah, I wanted to make just a real quick comment before I do that. I had knee replacement surgery, and they put me on opioids, for pain reliever. And one thing they kept telling me, I have a real high pain tolerance, and so it wasn't like I was crying out for meds all the time. But the one thing I kept hearing was, stay ahead of the pain, stay ahead of the pain, So even after I came home, I had the hydrocodones, and it was up to me to stay ahead of the pain, so to speak. And I already knew about the opioid epidemic in the country, and so my thoughts about that was, I don't want to get my brain wired to the point of saying I've got to stay ahead of the pain, because I think that's the perfect way to become addicted, And so I just purposely said, no, I'm not gonna take any more of that. But the main reason I called was I have a son, 39 years old. His father died when he was 14, and don't know for sure if that had anything to do with it, or just he was in a Christian school, going to school, and probably made two of his worst friends there, as far as them not being good for one another. And he started on meds when he was probably 15 or 16 years old, although I didn't recognize it. I was a single mother with him at that time, and He had a brother a year older than him that sailed through that period and did fine. So I don't know. But he did make some poor choices for friends. And then he became a poor choice for a friend. And so he was addicted to meth for probably about 8 years. And he should have really been in prison, but he had a merciful probation officer who worked closely with him. And he had him on probation, and then he put him into rehab because he tested positive one time when he came in to be checked.
Sure. And let me put you on hold because we're coming to one of those mandatory breaks because I want you to come back and talk about how the family was part of that healing, but we need to take one of those mandatory breaks, and we are continuing our conversation with Rick Van Warner. We will do so right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Oscar Rodriguez is a decorated Air Force veteran who retired in 2013 after 33 years of service. Oscar was invited by Air Force Master Sergeant Chuck Roberson to give a flag-folding speech at Roberson's military retirement ceremony, something he's done over 100 times. Oscar agreed to give his stirring and patriotic speech, but the Air Force unit commander at Chuck's base presented a problem. Oscar's flag-folding speech included the word God. First, the unit commander tried to prevent Oscar from even attending the ceremony. When he was informed that he could not legally prevent his attendance, he told Chuck that Oscar could not give the speech. But like any good airman, Oscar was not going to abandon his wingman. He decided to give the speech anyway. And as a private citizen, Oscar is no longer subject to the commander's authority. But when Oscar stood to deliver the speech during the retirement ceremony, 4 senior airmen approached him, assaulted him, and physically dragged him out of the retirement ceremony before he even had a chance to say the word God. The Air Force broke the law and abused its power, discriminating against Oscar and service members everywhere who want to mention God in their private retirement ceremony. First Liberty Institute represents Oscar because no one should be assaulted for mentioning the name God. To learn how First Liberty Institute is defending religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Rick Van Warner with us as we talk about the book On Pills and Needles. We also have Ann with us in Missouri. And Ann, again, your son involved in crystal meth, addicted. What role did your family play in his recovery?
Okay, I just wanted to add real quickly that so many times when a person gets off of some kind of a drug like crystal meth, they will turn to alcohol. So we've had about 25 years of this, and he has been clean now for quite some time. He's going to a technical school to change his vocation, went through a divorce, you know, all of the things that goes along with that. But one of my pastors many, many years ago told me, said, I told him that I was going to clothe myself with the armor of God, I was going to go through this. And you always wonder if this time when you help someone, is it going to kind of boost them over the mountain, or is it just going to help them, assist them? So that's something you have to really be in prayer about, because you don't want to become a helper, a crutch for them. And so it requires a lot of prayer. But I just would encourage parents, just do not give up. He's 39 years old. He's getting a new lease on life with a new occupation. And I've seen God work in his life in so many ways. And other people probably don't see it, but I do, because I see him every day. And I see the small things. But I have a prayer group of about a dozen people that I know pray for him every day. And I know it's a battle, this wiring the brain thing. This is something that I'm very much aware happens. And I think I've heard that a male's brain isn't really hardwired until they're, about 28 or something like that? I seem like I read that.
At least mid-20s, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so see, he has been in the midst of this for a long, long time through his very formative years. And but just don't give up. That's the only thing I would say is, you can't do it without prayer. God wants everyone to reach the full stature of life that he has planned for them. And it's not like we are sacrificing as a family. It's like we are walking with the Lord, and he'll walk with us daily in a closer way than we've ever imagined. And we will grow from it, too.
Very good.
That would be my encouragement. Just don't give up, but don't try to do it on your own.
That's right. Rick, any comments? Because, again, families are very important. You don't want to be an enabler, but on the other hand, they need to know that you're there for them.
Well, I think it's the most difficult part of this whole struggle is that where is the lines and the boundaries that you draw on, enabling or not. I think, God bless this woman who just called. The fact that her son is doing well, that's wonderful. It's a testament to her and her strength. And in our case, our son was twice resuscitated from overdose and is very lucky to be alive. But as I continue to tell him every day, is that God has a plan for you. You wouldn't be alive otherwise. And he's doing much better now. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is that it is possible to come out the other end of this terrible journey of having a loved one who's an addict. It is possible to overcome, and I want people to not give up hope and to not give up, because as tough as it is, we're there. We have a choice. Are we willing to get in the trenches and fight and do whatever it takes to try to keep our kids alive, or are we going to just kind of wave the white flag, kick it down the road, and say, look, it's tough love. He's just on his own, and whatever will be will be. So I think it's a tough line to cross. There were times early on in our son's battle where we just, for the sake of the other children in the house, we could not allow him to live at our house when he was in active addiction. But in later years, in the last couple of years, his last relapses, we have detoxed him at home and really just surrounded him with our love and acceptance. Yes. Stop trying to judge or care, and don't sweat the little things. We don't sweat anymore, what kind of crazy T-shirt he wears, or if he wants to have his hair, or, that he got things that used to be, the little things don't matter. Your job is to keep them alive and let them know that no matter what, no matter how bad it gets, that you love them, and that God has a purpose for them in the scheme of things. And that's what we've managed to do to date. But it's never over. It's as she just said, it's a lifelong battle. We're in our 9th year of dealing with this now, and things are great right now. They look good right now, but we don't have illusions that anything is ever over necessarily. Not when it comes to the power of opioid addiction.
Your book does a very good job of reminding us of the kind of the roller coaster: pills, mills, police, and pain. Back to the brink. Dangerous demons return. So sometimes you have a breakthrough and then you have a step back. And so we're just about out of time. I apologize for those who were not able to get on to share their story or to ask their question. But just before we go, Rick, let's talk about what might be a use of this book. This is certainly one that we could put in the hands of parents who are going through this so that they can see that you're a fellow traveler. I would recommend this book to pastors and counselors and other individuals, teachers, to really understand this opioid epidemic, which we're just, I think, right now in 2017 and 2018, just starting to get a little bit of a handle on the opioid epidemic. And so it's really, I think, essential that we know a little bit more about this. And again, you do a pretty good job not only of telling the story of Tommy, but also educating us about how this happened and why it's such a big problem in America today.
Yes, I think I wrote the book with the purpose of helping other families. It was not it wasn't it was God's choice, not my choice, that I had to do this book and to really help others, because the biggest thing is families that are going through this tend to, especially with the tremendous stigma around opioids and heroin in particular, people walk this journey far too often alone. It's something that's kept within the family, and it isn't something they're sharing necessarily with friends. Please don't walk this battle alone. I tried to write the book to say, look, there is the more you share about this, you find out that everybody is going through a similar thing. Everybody has something in their family of this nature, and it's poor, it's middle class, it's black, it's white, it's across the country. It doesn't discriminate. It can affect any family. So I think the biggest thing I would say is don't let the stigma of this stop you from sharing with others and seeking out support of others, and from giving your person in your life struggling acceptance and love they need so desperately.
Rick, I appreciate you sharing so much with us today here on Point of View and sharing that in your book, and thank you for being with us today on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me.
This, again, is a part of the opioid epidemic. I think that even though we've talked about this before and will continue to do so, this might have given you a little more of a personal look at that. And even as I look at the screen, I can tell that some of you are dealing with different aspects of drug abuse, which is, again, a topic we will come back to again. But as I've given you some of those facts and figures, it is a reminder that this is a big issue, and that's why we will continue to talk about it here on Point of View. If you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about this, there, first of all, some material that is available on our website, a link to this book. If you know somebody that might benefit from this interview, you can go to the watch or listen button there and pass it on. You can go to the Facebook Live or any place that you would want to pass it on to them. Maybe this would be an encouragement to them, especially to know about this book and to really know a little bit more about what we're talking about. Tomorrow is our weekend edition. We'll be talking about the March for Life in Washington, D.C. Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter will be here. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again,